So for this assignment, you're going to be creating a little sampler of textures. So remember that your nature-inspired vessel requires at least hand-building techniques, at least 2 compartments, no more than 5, and at least 3 different textures. And you've already been completing a couple assignments where you're looking at examples from nature or nature-inspired vessels or nature-inspired forms and artwork. The textures that you use on your vessel, they should not just be drawn on the surface. So in this video, you're going to see me demonstrate 4 different ways to create texture. These are our decorative techniques. So for the instructions for this assignment, you're going to create 1 circular tile that is 3 by 3. Yes, that is rather small, but I just don't want you spending too much time on this assignment. You're going to refer to your ideas, your visual studies and sketches, and you're going to create samples of the textures you may use for your vessel. Doesn't mean you'll definitely use them, but this is your chance to experiment and try them out. We need to experiment and create at least 3 different textures on this tile. This is your chance to practice in order to decide what you intend to include. So when you finished your texture sampler tile, you're going to show it to me and I will check this with the final your vessel. So to create this little tile, you'll need a slab of clay and you will need our little template. I made a bunch of little small circles that are 3 by 3 inches. So you're going to take your fettling knife and you're going to carefully cut out this little tile. So after you cut it out, it's always a good idea to kind of round out the edges. And then you actually start adding textures. In this assignment in Canvas, you have actually access to a wonderful slideshow that has a lot of ideas, But definitely consider what textures would you like to use in the future. Now, how can you set up your tile? You could literally, again, we need at least 3. You can do more than 4 textures. You can do 5, but we need at least 3. So you could potentially literally section your tile off into 3 parts and do textures within all 3. You could just, like that. You could have 3 different textures. It's up to you. I should be able to, though, understand that you have at least 3 different textures on your tile. So let's first focus on impressions. So impressions. You can use really any type of tool or item that you can indent or push in repetition on your piece. Texture mats and texture rollers work really well, but note that you are going to get a certain imprint on the surface. So this might not actually work for you. And while you're thinking, well, Miss J, this texture mat has honeycomb, which is nature inspired, but it's already contrived. You could use this, which I'll use in the demo, but we can actually add to this impression. Things to watch out for when you're making impressions. Pressure control is a big thing. You might end up pushing through the wall, so you need to compensate for the pressure by putting your hand on the back side of the wall. And impressions, they're typically easier to do when your clay is semi-leather hard or semi-moist. If it's super leather hard, it might be hard to push something into the surface. If it's super soft, the item might get stuck. So I'm just going to demonstrate in terms of nature-inspired impressions here. Now, of course, if you're using a texture mat, it is a lot easier to roll it on just using a rolling pin. So there's that pressure, there's that impression there, but I can still add to this. I can kind of roughen it up. So I'm actually going to take this piece of what's this called? Lace, and impress it into the surface. So now I'm getting some sort of layered effect. So see, now it's suddenly a little bit more textured there. It's a little uneven. I also have in the Ceramic Studio, I have seashells that you can push into to get different irregular marks, because that's the thing about nature-inspired vessels and nature-inspired forms. The details are not perfect, right? The details that we find of things in nature are not perfect. Now we can take just tools as well and just Again, this is what we meant by repetitive marks. You can also try doing this. I know this is a demo, so it seems a little frivolous on what I'm doing, but the whole point is to show you, you can get very creative just by the impressions that you put into the clay. And again, I'm just trying out different things. Next decorative technique is called surface manipulation. This is one you're very familiar with. You're using any tool to indent and manipulate the form to create a unique. So this is like a mixture of impressions and appliques because you might be adding to the surface. The thing about surface manipulation is pressure control. You might push through the wall, so you need to compensate for pressure. I know that sounds exactly like the impressions instructions, but those are just things you need to watch out for. With our vessels, we don't want the walls to be thicker than ½ an inch though. And when should you, what moisture level should your clay be when you're doing surface manipulation? I really suggest semi-leather hard and semi-moist because the clay can give a little bit, but it's going to maintain that form. In terms of a demo of surface manipulation, I also have bundles of foil in the clay room, so you can actually use this for impressions, and it does create this very irregular surface. So as I was saying when I did the impressions demonstration, you know, there are ways to make the textures look random, but also neat and refined at the same time. Now, surface manipulation, you might be doing some scoring and slipping. Maybe you're carving into the surface. For example, if I want to dig, right, I want to manipulate this surface here. Again, I'm thinking about natural forms, right? I'm kind of carving, but I'm going to maybe leave these gouged areas in here. Again, there's a way to pull this off and make it look intentional versus just being lazy and I don't want to clean it up. We also have these wooden spoons. I found them in the closet and thought maybe you can use them for something. Again, I'm right here, I'm just doing an impression. But what if I want to actually take some clay and add to the surface in terms of like an applique, right? So I can take these little bits of clay, and what if I want to form like the underside of flower petals, right? The underside, not the top of a flower petal, but the underside, right? So I want to create a bunch of these forms. This is definitely surface manipulation. So again, we need to score and slip anything that we are attaching, because even though this is a sample, you know, we're gonna actually keep this tile for a while. So as you work on it, and really use this assignment as a way to experiment and just see, do I want to use these techniques in my design? Do I want to use that? And I know you're thinking, Miss J, these little pieces look kind of random, but again, I'm just demonstrating totally on the fly here. But again, if you see something in the Pinterest board or in a folder that you really want to try out and you didn't include it maybe in a sketch, right? So again, I can put a bunch of these pieces here. Now, can't I take a big bundle of clay? I'm going to take this piece of clay. I just made a ball. I just flattened it. And we're just going to score and slip it, because again, we don't want to lose the habit of doing that. And then you're thinking, well, how can I manipulate the surface here? We can use this back edge of the tool and actually start blending it. Actually, again, this is when you really want to put your attention to what you're doing, slowing down and noticing, you know, are these the textures that you want to actually use in your form? Is that, you know, in your vessel? Again, surface manipulation, right? This, just doing this, right? This is not quite incising because the lines are really thick. But again, I'm now starting to create these different curves. You can dig into the tile, okay? Our decoration technique is additive, and you're very familiar with this. It's basically when we're adding all these appliques to the surface. So you're adding pieces of clay to the form by scoring and slipping. And remember, your vessel needs to have at least 2 compartments, no more than 5. So the second compartment is not an applique, but you do need to obviously score and slip it together. So things to watch out for when you are doing additive techniques. If you're adding to the clay, match the moisture level to score and slip as well. So if your clay is really dry and the clay you're trying to attach is super wet, it's not going to attach very well. And ideally, additive works better when the clay is leather hard, because even if you have super soft plastic clay, if the clay is leather hard, those two moisture levels are very similar. If this was super, super firm, it might be hard for me to add this much softer clay. So many possibilities for additive textures. This would be considered additive, right? All these forms here. Look how this person made these little spheres. This is completely additive as well. There's some more additive. So it is a lot of scoring and slipping. Again, scoring and slipping, right? So if I was to try to recreate what I saw in there, right, we're still going to score and slip as usual. And again, you're not covering your entire 5x5 tile with the same textures. You're just doing a little sampling on the form, but actually repeat it enough so I can understand what you were doing. Don't just do like 3 of them. Like actually put some effort into it. Maybe this will become a tile that will actually end up firing. We could do that. And then we can actually maybe experiment with some of the glazes on there. So let's say this is kind of what I saw in one of the slides, and maybe I'm going to add these little dots to it. So remember, your appliques can have impressions on there as well. I mean, already that's really interesting. If you want to do a bunch of I don't want to say flower petals, but flattened pieces of clay that are layered on each other, just think about how you're going to position them. How are they going to overlap with each other? So that's something to think about. Sometimes students forget and they start adding and then they realize they're running out of room, or they just didn't compensate for the space, right? So now I'm starting to layer this. So again, a lot of choices for additive technique. Our last technique, and you don't necessarily have to use all 4 techniques on your vessel, but the last one is subtractive. And you've done this as well. You're using any tool that can carve, gouge, or scrape layers off your piece. So you're carving into the surface of the clay, you're removing clay. That's subtractive. Things to watch out for though. The thickness of your piece, you might end up cutting through the walls. That's the thing. If you don't need to cut through the wall, please don't do that. It is a lot easier to carve when your clay is leather hard. And so what can you do for carving? Oh my gosh, you can take these tools to create these lines. Now, if you decide to carve into your 5x5 tile, just watch out how thick the tile is. This is when you want to consider for your vessel, do you need thicker lines, right? Do you need thick lines? Let's see. So again, this is also carving. Now I could, so those are the 4 techniques. When you finish your tile, you're going to show it to me. I'm going to check this along with the final sketches for this project, and then you'll be able to actually move on and start constructing.